All right, I'm Jeff Cook, and this is The Reading Room. Trying something that I've wanted to do for a while. Going to be flying solo. Going to do a deep dive into some of the most important books written on the Enneagram. Before I get into the book we're going to look at, I actually wanted to let you know a little bit about me. Some of you don't know much of my story, but I'm from Carbondale, Colorado. Bounced around Denver when I was real young, and I live in Greeley now. Greeley is the home of the University of Northern Colorado, which is where I got my bachelor's, but I have an MA in philosophy from the University of Colorado. Go Buffs. Got my degree and immediately went home, got a university teaching job at UNC, and I always just wanted to be a philosophy teacher, so I never felt it necessary to, spend 4 years in my basement pursuing a PhD. I taught at UNC from August 25th, 2006, the day my youngest child was born. Yes, I started my career and had a second child on the same day. And I taught until May of 2022. And that's when I decided to change careers. Started writing some Enneagram books and doing this podcast work. This is my 10-year anniversary, 2026, with Enneagram. I first got introduced to the material just a few months before my beloved stepfather and my beloved mother-in-law passed, and a very difficult time. At this time, I needed something different. And I started an Enneagram podcast 3 years later in 2019 with autodidact TJ Wilson. I published a book early on in my career with HarperCollins on ethics in 2008. It's called Seven. And I did another book in 2010 on the thoughts of Jesus called Everything New. And right now, I'm in the midst of writing a 5-book series on the Enneagram. Part of doing this reading room is simply ensuring that I'm on top of the bibliography. I don't read well unless I'm discussing material, teaching material, doing something with the stuff. So I imagine there's a lot of you who are next level in your Enneagram study. You've been deep in the material and you are like me and you just want a space where you can discuss the ideas with informed people. So that's what we're going to do. Each week, I'm going to record and release a deep dive into a chapter or two of the most important Enneagram books there are. And then each week for the foreseeable future, I'm going to invite our members to come together on Tuesday nights to discuss those sections online. So if you want to get involved, our first gathering will be online March 24th, 2026. If you're listening to this down the timeline, just go to aroundthecircle.org, see what we're up to. Quick plug here. Think of aroundthecircle.org like a gym membership. It's a gym membership for your heart and your mind and your inner life. A membership is $20 there, which is far less than most gyms. And we have around 100 hours of fantastic material, including books, videos, workshops, interviews with the most informed Enneagram teachers on the planet. In the coming year, we're going to be trying to create far more spaces for connection with each other, connection with us, with Katie and I and TJ and the rest. Presently, we have about 600 free members, and around 100 of you have jumped into the paid tier. You're my favorites. You're making the engine go if you jump into our paid tier, and it just allows us to create all the things. So if you are interested in talking about Enneagram and engaging some really good stuff for you, for your heart, for your future, jump in. Do a free trial. There's the $20 membership. There's a 7-week free trial. You can come in and see what it's all about. Aroundthecircle.org. Take a look. Now, we're going to start the reading room. We're going to start with a book that was published just 2 years ago in 2024. This is arguably the most important Enneagram book written in the last 25 years because this book is the first significant study on the scientific perspective on Enneagram by a high-level set of academics. The book is written by a team of PhDs and medical doctors, and it's fronted by Dr. Daniel J. Siegel. Dr. Siegel got his degree from Harvard University and serves as a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA. The book that we're going to look at looks like this. It is Personality and Wholeness in Therapy. Integrating 9 Patterns of Development Pathways on Clinical Practice. Yes, that is the magnetic title. I told a friend of mine the title of this book, and they said, that sounds fascinating, which I think is therapist language for I'm trying to be supportive here, but I have no idea what you just said. Personality and wholeness in therapy. We're actually going to talk about personality, going to talk about wholeness, and you don't need to be a therapist to jump into this book and really love it, but we're going to tackle this sucker. I'm going to start off the reading room with just 5 questions, get us into kind of the bones here, set the stage. We're going to swim out into the water and catch a wave. So, why this book, Jeff? Why are you picking this as your first one? Here's the thing. Aside from the crazy impressive resume of Dr. Siegel, this book took 20 years to compose. It integrates the Enneagram with neuroscience and developmental theory, and it does so based on 50,000 narrative interactions in first-person reports, which is a lot. This book takes the Enneagram, which is often framed as a wisdom tradition, as you know. It moves it into the realm of cognitive development and understanding of human wholeness and thriving. Again, we're going to talk about those categories. Talking about, what does it look like to be a human being in a therapeutic space with the science behind it. So this kind of focus isn't necessarily new in psychology. Many contemporary psychological theories seek to engage and elevate the interaction between some of the things that we talk about in Enneagram, the mind, the body, the emotions. But for many of us, we have experienced something profound through the Enneagram specifically. And we have a question in the back of our minds and hearts, and probably something that our buddy keeps asking us. What do the scholars say about this? Is there any science around the Enneagram? And for many of us, the answer has had to be, there's not much. I haven't seen anything. Who knows? This book is a serious move in the direction of here's what the science can say about Enneagram, and here are all the roads forward for future study. So I just gave you my background, not as a scientist, I'm a philosopher. So what is it that I could possibly offer in doing a book study on a scientific text? What's a nice little philosopher doing in a serious place like this? Well, I will have you know, I'm not only a philosophy professor, I'm a podcaster, and podcasters need content. Let's actually talk about philosophy. What philosophy is? Philosophy is the foundation of all knowledge. If you were to ask, what is the foundation of all knowledge? That's not a scientific question. That's a philosophical question. And the answer actually is philosophy. Philosophy comes from 2 Greek words, philo and sophia, which mean the love of wisdom. If you get the highest degree at a university, it is a PhD, a philosophy doctorate. That means you have shown yourself accredited in the love of wisdom of your doctrine. That's why you get a doctorate, and so you become a doctor. Philosophy concerns itself with the thought and theory of all the disciplines, be they in the sciences, music, literature, social studies, etc. You are getting a philosophy doctorate because you are concerning yourselves with the foundational theories and ideas, the foundations of knowledge in whatever you're studying. So you have a PhD in biology, you have a PhD in English, you have a PhD in music. All of that means that you have done serious business with the theories. It is the thing about philosophy is a very artistic enterprise, and it concerns itself with what we can know, what we ought to do, what exists, what has meaning. These are the sorts of questions philosophers ask. Philosophy is not the realm of data collection. Philosophy can tell you what evidence is, but it doesn't do the work of analysis per se. Philosophy is going to build theories. And if the theory is coherent, we can then send the specialists in, the real scientists, out into the real world and you see if the theory survives. But philosophy is about theory. A lot of this book, Personality and Wholeness in Therapy, concerns itself with theory because it's having to make a big pitch. Is Enneagram scientific? So, third question, what is the overlap of the sciences and philosophy when it comes to Enneagram? It's in that space. In my view, the Enneagram at its core is a theory about human motivation. It postulates that when all the evidence is in, all human motivations can be categorized into 9 camps. That's a big claim. I think it holds. I think there's good reasons to hold this. In my view, the 9 Enneagram types, they originate from a threefold way that human beings receive the world. When we take in the world, when we experience the world, each of us give preference to the information coming into us through either our emotional center, our cognitive center, or our somatic experience, our head, heart, body. In Enneagram language, these are going to make up the 3 centers, and then we process that information in one of 3 ways. We process that information in an internal space that represses action, in an independent space that represses feeling, or in an external space that engages thinking last. So those 2 moves, 3 ways you take in the world, 3 ways you process the world. When you combine those, it creates 9 types. That is the Enneagram. That is where we get the word Enneagram. In fact, it means 9-sided, as though humanity itself as a whole had 9 different, faces, or 9 different ways of being, 9 primary archetypes. Dr. Siegel and his team are going to frequently say that those who have embraced this Enneagram theory have found it highly effective in practice, and when using the theory in their relationships and their own pursuits of personal health, it just has a lot of usefulness. Now, that doesn't mean it's like quote unquote true, whatever we're going to mean by that, but it does mean that it has usefulness, practicality, and that at least gives us a reason for kind of jumping in. So what is it that the sciences are going to say? Question 4, what does science say here about the Enneagram? Because you and I, maybe we've experienced it as, this is practical, it's life-changing, it really helped our family during that time of crisis. What, however, does the science say? Well, imagine taking that question seriously enough to study it at scale. Imagine drawing from 50,000 narrative interviews and personal experiences. And imagine that question being taken up by a distinguished group of scholars, and they're led by a UCLA professor of psychiatry. That's what we have in this book. We have those 50,000 narrative interviews, and we have some folks who have done real business in psychiatry and therapy coming to the question, when the Enneagram is inserted into these sorts of interviews and conversation, what emerges? What can we say definitively from the scientific perspective? That's actually what we have in the book, and we're going to be discussing what this team found. So let me tell you how this is all going to work. I'm going to go chapter by chapter through Personality and Wholeness, and it's going to be at aroundthecircle.org. I'm going to release some of these on podcasts just to let you get your toe dipped into the lake that we're going to be swimming in. And I'm going to give you a sample of all that. Going to dip our toe in the lake. And this episode right here is going to be a sample of all that. So we're going to cover the introduction to this book. It's only about 15 pages. If you want to discuss the intro to the book, all of this is going to be kind of a 2-step process. We're going to do that online. Our first online gathering is going to be the evening of Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. Here's what you can do. Go buy the book, read the intro, sign up at Around the Circle. If you already are a member, just find the link. If you're not a member yet, sign up to be a member, and then find the link and register on Zoom for our time together. And then we're going to have, hopefully 10, 20, 30 people get together, and we're going to talk about the book. The link for all of that, The link for our Zoom meeting is going to be in the show notes. It'll take you to aroundthecircle.org. You'll have to sign up for a membership. If this works, what's going to happen is we're going to have a rhythm. I'm going to be going through some of the great Enneagram books. I'm going to post on them. I'm going to comment on them for about an hour. And then we are going to get together on the subsequent Tuesday, read down some of the work together, and just like, what did you see here? What did you see here? And we're just going to talk about the books. So it'll be a book club. We are going to do a reading room. So to get into this time, I'm going to read down about 20 passages from the introduction to personality and wholeness in therapy. I'm going to give you some comments. Going to get comfortable with the material. Going to get us into a spot where we can post some good questions on Tuesday to the text to each other. Perhaps the case you don't want to get together with others and discuss, you obviously can access these episodes and just listen to them. So here we go. Personality and therapy in wholeness. Book starts out with an introduction. They say, welcome to an exploration of how we can understand the deep mechanisms of the mind within personality and use this perspective to promote therapeutic growth. Personality, therapy, growth. As a philosopher, I'm going to come and define some terms. Those are big terms. What is your personality? What is therapy? If I'm growing, what am I growing into? I want to define personality. I would argue that, your personality is about your person, your inner persona, your inner form and qualities. It is something like that mixture of your motive, identity, of the shape, and shaping. Your past experiences have shaped your inner self. And your personality is that mixed with your relational tendencies and your predispositions. Both in Enneagram and outside Enneagram, personality seems to name this sort of thing, the patterns that you have within you of thinking, feeling, and doing. That cuts across a ton of psychological theory, which we could talk about in the future. But obviously, those are big Enneagram categories. Your persona is made up of that inner life, and it gets expressed in your thinking, feeling, and doing. And that shapes how a person perceives the world and responds to it. Personality then is it's just a huge idea. You are in large measure your personality. Personality of all things comes from a Greek word, I believe, that is about a mask. It's the mask you wear. I always trip on that a little bit because, your identity, your true self, I think that there is something about your personality that overlaps those. But we're going to explore this idea a ton in this book, and we're going to do that later. The second is therapy. Now, this book isn't only for therapists again. It's for those who are interested in just what the sciences say, what can be said, definitively through the physical evidence about the Enneagram in practice. Therapy, it seems to me, is something like it's like a relationship. It's a structured relationship that you have with a trained guide who's going to help you understand your thoughts, feelings, behaviors, right? And sometimes this is done with a target, like you want to reduce the suffering in your life or you want to increase your ability to connect with other people. You're going to a therapy to understand feeling, thinking, and doing with some targets in mind. And again, very much what Enneagram seems to be about at some level if you start doing the work. And the work is about growth. And so growth, again, in this quote, they're providing a perspective to promote therapeutic growth. And growth is a value term. It's actually a philosophical term. The sciences can't tell you what you should aim at, what you ought to aim at. The question of should and ought is very much philosophical language. So what I assume is being meant here by growth is that, through this study, you're going to have a greater self-awareness. You're going to have more emotional regulation. You're going to have more capacity to connect with other people. And I think big for him is going to be something like freedom to choose healthier patterns of thought and action and perhaps feeling. So that's our quote 1. Quote 2, moving into the book. As the first name author of the book, I, Dan, want to invite you to come alongside me with my co-authors. Notice this list: Laura Baker, PhD, David Daniels, MD at Stanford, Denise Daniels, PhD, and Jack Killen, MD, as we journey into an interpersonal neurobiology framework of the patterns of feeling, thought, and behavior that are characteristics collectively known as our personality. One last term that pops here is interpersonal neurobiology. That's a tongue twister. Interpersonal neurobiology. That means that you're studying how the brain, mind, and relationships are interacting with, other human beings, but specifically, how do the brain, mind, and relationships shape our human development and our emotional regulation and our well-being. And lo and behold, Dr. David Daniels coined this word, and is a founder of the concept and approach to looking at what does it look like for all the things going on within us and without. How do they shape who we are? Apparently, we got a good guide here, and he is very, just to say it, he is very attracted to what the Enneagram has to offer when it comes to that topic, which seems to be quite important. How are you formed anyway? So, quote 3. This book is our attempt as 5 scientists, 2 trained as empirical personality researchers, and 3 as physician scientists, with 2 of us being psychotherapists, to offer you a scientifically informed framework of personality and its application in psychotherapy. There is a tremendous amount of empirical scientific study needed to validate or disprove the framework we are proposing, and he's going to go on. But I love this insight into where he's at. Lots of empirical scientific study needs to be done to, one, either validate or disprove the framework. So right up front, he's being humble. This book isn't going to do the full job, but it's also the case, and this needs to be said. And I say every time I debate Enneagram with folks, I say this 28 times because it just is the case that for those who are critical of the Enneagram, you haven't done the study yet. And I know you haven't done the study yet because I've looked at the literature. I've done the search on JSTOR. I'm familiar with every article that's been written about the Enneagram through scientific journals, and it just ain't much. The question on the table is partially, has the Enneagram been validated scientifically? But on a flip side, and a really important side for those who are critics and skeptics, it hasn't been disconfirmed. And here's the thing about theories. Theories are never, ever, ever proven. Theories aren't a black and white thing like that. Theories can be disconfirmed, but nobody has done the work to disconfirm the Enneagram yet at a level that's satisfactory. There's a lot of folks who pitch ideas, but a lot of them are trash. Setting that aside, let's talk about confirmation. Here's the thing about proving theories. There's really 8, notice this, there are levels to how one would advance theories. The first is, for example, does this theory make sense? Is it coherent? I think the Enneagram is incredibly coherent. Passes level 1. Does it seem true? For a lot of us who have gotten into Enneagram, we have felt the pull, we have felt the jolt, something hit us. It has a face validity to it that's really worth naming. Now, just because it seems true doesn't make it quote unquote true, but it does give us energy and reason for pursuing new steps on saying, look, I'm real interested in this theory. I wonder if. Thirdly, does this theory seem to describe reality? Does it have explanatory power? Anyone who has been to an Enneagram event where they've had panels and you get people who are the same type talking about their type will see immediately on their faces how much they connect with the other people on the panel and share something really significant. It seems to have explanatory power. Fourthly, Does it work? Like in practice, does it have clinical validity? A ton of this book is going to be, this is where it's useful. This is what we've seen. This is how it's changed some people's lives in really positive ways. That is helpful in terms of coming to a theory. That allows us to say, look, in practice, just practically speaking, this seems to have power. There's a lot of stuff, we'll talk about this in a minute, but there's a lot of stuff that we don't understand yet, but we know that it works. And that gives us something to at least be intrigued by. And that's absolutely where the Enneagram sits. Now, Enneagram does great work on these fronts, very much in those therapeutic settings. But if we were to push a little further into the sciences and scientific validation, some scientists are going to want to ask other questions in order to confirm, disconfirm the theory. So for example, is there anything here that can be measured? Can researchers design variables and design instruments that capture what the theory claims? And that's really tricky when it comes to motive. When we are talking about motivation, designing instruments that capture what the theory claims, that's not going to be very easy. Can the Enneagram be measured? I'm not a scientist, so maybe there's more work that can be done here. Does the data support the theory? That would be another question. That is there like empirical validation? I think that there's going to be a lot that we could be saying here, and again, they're going to go into it. Big for me is something like, can the Enneagram predict outcomes? In terms of theory, does it have predictive power, predictive validity? I want to say, for example, the Enneagram does a great job. If I know your type, I can tell you where you struggle. If I know your type, I can tell you how you will process information. If I know your type, I can tell you a whole host of things about what your tendencies probably are. So for me, and I don't know how to capture this scientifically, again, not a scientist, but it seems to have predictive power, and that seems to have quite a bit of, prima facie power to it when confirming a theory. Lastly, and this will be a big thing for Enneagram, do independent researchers repeat studies and find similar results? So we're going to see what their study looks like. Obviously, for those who want to come to Enneagram, not as quote unquote like champions in the material, but even as critics of the material, when they do the research, when they ask the questions, when they conduct their own, validation of what is being said, is it the case that similar results occur? All of this is just kind of blowing open some of the doors that are out there for talking about how a theory like the Enneagram would get confirmed. So when it comes to Enneagram, many are looking for validation in those scientific ways. And from what I can tell so far in the book, they're going to be dipping their toe into those waters, and we'll see what they see. Quote number 4, the gathering of these first person or subjective reports, the 50,000 people that they talk to, into an assembled set is what we in science call second person data. This means we've listened closely to what individuals have stated about their lived experience, and rather than just having a singular case report, something that has at times been called me-search. That's fun, not research, it's me-search. It's the introspective thing. Like anytime you're going to get evidence about Enneagram, it's going to have to start with self-reporting, me-search. We have thousands of these reports. Now, our task is to look at third-person data, meaning objective findings from other ways of studying reality, such as through neural structure and function. By examining patterns of personality and how they develop along certain pathways, we come to an exciting and useful view that we formally call patterns of developmental pathways, or PDP. Going to reference PDP all over the place in this book. Patterns of developmental pathways. In fact, later he's going to say he uses patterns and pathways kind of interchangeably. But for those of you who love Enneagram and are used to talking about Enneagram, he's talking about type. This is how your type has emerged. It's the pathway through which all of the experiences that come into you are churned, processed, and this is where you're walking given your type. That's the pattern of your inner self, is the pathway that you walk. This, he says, is a clinically useful, scientifically informed framework. That's a conclusion from an authority. He needs to prove that, but that's fairly robust. That's sticking your chest out there and saying, we know some stuff after we've done these 50,000 interviews. We propose a possible developmental trajectory for personality, but even without that lifespan view, the ideas here are still useful for working with clients in the present moment of their lives. He's going to fall back on usefulness over and over and over and over again in this book. Again, usefulness is a way that he is judging the theory. How you judge a theory is a philosophical question. Usefulness is a view called pragmatism. Is this practical, pragmatic? Does it work? That's one theory by which you judge ideas. Comes out William James. It's a very American way of coming to the question of truth and knowledge. Is this useful? Yes, that means it's true. That would be William James, how William James comes to the question. The reason that we like truth is because it's useful, says James. If truth routinely created conditions where you experience pain, we wouldn't value truth as much, says William James. Quote 5 builds on usefulness. Here in Personality and Wholeness and Therapy, this book, we have devoted to balancing what we've learned from the accumulated narratives and what we are correlating with neural mechanisms of empirical science. We acknowledge that this is a proposal for a theoretical perspective. We've talked about theory. One in need of empirical research to validate its accuracy and details. But as clinicians, David and I have found this conciliant view quite useful in our therapeutic practice, and we hope you will too. So again, challenge. There's a ton of research still needs to be done. We've done 50,000 of these discussions. We find it useful. We're offering it up from that space. Quote 6, the reason we are offering this hypothetical framework is that as scientists and clinicians, we see the potential for this perspective to inspire new and direct applications that can help people's lives. As individuals too, we certainly have found this to be quite helpful, but that does not make this scientifically proven. He's saying exactly what I said, but I do want to emphasize that it's useful because of what he's saying here, that it helps people in their lives. Now, again, you need to find usefulness. You need to find help. We're going to see that he thinks that this frees people from some of their patterns, from the obstacles, mental challenges, allows them to move forward into what he says is like moving from a prison to a playground is his language. That's what usefulness and help look like. Quote 7, the goal of therapy is then not to eliminate a pathway, but to make that particular set of proclivities more flexible and functional, and to enable access to other strategies of living, to allow differentiation and linkage, the process of integration to be freed. Integration enables a life of harmony to emerge, one characterized by flexibility, adaptability, coherence, energy, and stability. I should have just waited for a second. There it is. That's what usefulness means. You free. This is a tool for freedom. This is a tool for integration. This is a tool for flexibility. This is a tool for adaptability. This is a tool for coherence, energy, and stability. If it provides those things, if it just provided one of those things, if it provides those things, then it's got some value and ought to be looked at and studied and even adopted as, UCLA professor of psychiatry. This man is saying this is where the Enneagram falls in terms of its value in conversations with clients. It strikes me as real powerful. Just because something comes from an authority does not, by definition, make it true. But arguments from authority do have significant power, because when authorities speak, they can say, look, I am familiar with all the questions on the table, and here is my opinion based on what I know of the evidences. And again, that's about the best you can get with theory sometimes, is just like the people who have really gotten into this, who have done the study and know the background literature and work in those spheres. When they come and say, this is my conclusion, yeah, you can, that's powerful stuff. So, quote 8. While mainstream psychiatry, in which I was initially trained, focuses on personality disorders, quote unquote, and generally not on personality itself, the broader field of mental health has a robust set of theories about personality that offer a range of models from which to draw ideas about our enduring way of feeling, thinking, and behaving. Really important self-disclosure here. Look, in psychiatry world, we focus on what broken. We're not necessarily starting with personality itself. We're starting with personality disorders. Personality, however, matters. We need to think about personality. We need to not just jump to what are the flaws. We need to say, look, what does a healthy, whole person look like? And let's define health first before we start talking about infection and what's been subtracted. Now, that is a really useful way of coming to any topic. This is Augustinian to go into philosophy. It's like you start with what's real, and then you talk about what's been subtracted. Like you see this in theology. People will jump immediately to here's what the sins are, here's what's wrong, here's what you're doing wrong, as opposed to saying you are beautifully and wonderfully made. And let's focus on that first before we start talking about dysfunction. You'll also hear a lot of my Enneagram oneness, which I don't think I mentioned, coming out and how I'm coming to this book, and specifically comments like that. Go 9. That is longer. With all of this existing theory, which we've talked about, with all of this existing theory, why would we need yet another model of personality? Why do we need, why even go down the Enneagram path? We got the big 5. We got Myers-Briggs and all the rest. Here's his answer. The Developmental Affective Neuroscience Foundation included in this PDP model, in this pathways typing model, we hope you'll offer a unique and powerful way of understanding personality. And we also hope that you will discover that its practical applications for psychotherapy will provide useful ways of helping people experience more fulfilling lives as they work with you on their therapeutic journey. It might be useful, and it might lead to more fulfilling lives. Just another tool in your belt, friend. If you've ever wondered how personality shapes our perceptions and interactions with the world and nudges us to perceive the world and act in certain ways, this book will offer some new inroads into how that may develop through the lens of how the embodied brain and our relational lives intersect to shape how we are. Here's a huge claim. 1, he's saying Enneagram is new. Do not go too fast past that. He has read all the literature. He is at one of the best universities on the planet, practicing his discipline. This stuff hasn't been seen before when talking about the biases of human beings. To go back, if you have ever wondered how personality shapes our perceptions and interactions with the world, man, that's who you are. How you perceive the world and how you engage. If you've wondered about this, which in essence is what human life is, you taking in the world and engaging it, this material has something new to say, which, to back up, is useful and targets flourishing. That, my friend, is gold right there. If you could discover that, that's gold. If you're like me, you may sometimes bristle at the notion of categories of personality that limit us rather than liberate us. You're a type 4, and here's your box, friend, that you're going to live in forever. Limits. This is actually, he's going to push beyond this and say, that's not how you should understand things. we ought to think of these pathways that we embrace as having the potential to liberate us, because that's how they function at their best in our inner self. He closes, balancing this individual approach to who we are and the pattern detection effort to seek common ground across individuals will be the heart of our efforts. Here's how we all look in the world. Here are all the different pathways, and here's a theory that explains it all. That's heavy lifting. I'm going to showcase the unity of all human beings and yet why they're diverse. That is the Western project, unity and diversity. It comes out of Plato and Aristotle. That is just enormous lifting. And again, he's seeking that enterprise. So, quote 10. So he's going to start asking questions. And these are really valuable. Let me pause on them. Question 1, how does personality, these are the sorts of things he wants to answer. How does personality correlate with brain systems as they grow from our earliest days? Now that's his specialty. This is how brain development works, how the personality forms. And he's going to overlap that with Enneagram. That's going to be a big part of this book. Number 2, how might these neural networks of personality actually be helping us or sometimes getting in the way of our leading a more fulfilling life? As is often said, Enneagram's going to expose your best self, expose your worst self. Sometimes the personality that we have that gets thrown forward actually becomes an obstacle to us getting the freedom, joy, happiness, flourishing, thriving that we actually desire. Notice he's going to name that. And again, what could be more valuable than finding out that sort of thing? 3, does personality reveal our true selves, quote unquote, or does it cover something up, making us fall asleep, quote unquote, to some fundamental essence of who we really are? This obviously is a question in Enneagram world of essence. Do you have a true self? Let's address that scientifically, he says. That'll be interesting. I don't actually know what the answer looks like on that front. Like, do you have a quote unquote true self? Or are you just putting forth, like, is the personality actually just a mask that isn't your real you? Is there something else to be discovered? We'll see what he says. Quote 11. Could these correlations with neural development we've uncovered actually be accurate? Is our theory true? Does it work? Right? Is it provable? Might the conceptual and scientific foundations we'll explore here hold up to careful future empirical studies that might use these proposals in their design and implementation? We certainly hope so, but as we await such controlled research projects, the practical utility of this new view of personality can be attained in your own life and work as clinicians. 2 things here. This makes up 2 quotes. This is quote 11 and 12. Want to talk theory, want to talk usefulness a little bit further. Very important. Theories like the Enneagram and theories like gravity, theories like evolution, theories are never proven. They are supported by evidence, they're corroborated, they're accepted by a community as what makes the most sense. Theories can be falsified. You can show that a theory is false, but they're not necessarily proven. Here's a famous example of this comes from Thomas Kuhn in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He looks at ancient physics, and he notes that those who are talking about motion will say that objects in motion tend to slow down and stop. Objects in motion tend to slow down and stop. You take a ball, you roll it across the floor, it will tend to slow down and stop. This happens every single time you do it. And here's the thing. No one today believes that objects in motion tend to slow down and stop in their physical theory because they've read Sir Isaac Newton. Newton poses the theory of gravity and says that objects in motion tend to stay in motion unless they're acted on by an outside force. Well, what's the outside force? I don't see any force. I rolled the ball across the ground and the sucker stopped. Newton says the force that's acting upon the ball is gravity, and gravity is an invisible force that is pulling the ball into the earth, and the friction that is causes the ball to slow down and stop. The theory of motion from the ancient world is replaced by a new theory of motion in the work of Sir Isaac Newton. So this is important when speaking about psychological theories. Like, how do theories work? Theories are always replaced. What's a better theory? What's a better story of how the world works? What's a better story of how my brain works and my personality works? This is what Enneagram is seeking to offer. I want to tell you a better story about how you should understand the framework of your personality, head, heart, and gut, as it were. I want to tell you a better story of how your emotions, your somatic experiences, and your cognition interact with the world. Your personality, your personal experiences of Enneagram is actually evidence. It's, it's phenomenological evidence of the Enneagram. Let's break this up. When coming to the Enneagram, in your experience, there is the evidence you can personally experience, that like personal evidence. It's also the case there's evidence, like, again, multiple people who have your same type who are saying, I have the same kind of experiences as you do underneath, that the person I love the most does not. It makes us the same kind of type. We have an archetype. That's real. And that also counts as evidence of a theory. When on the highest side, when the Enneagram predicts patterns and struggles and the thought processes that people who have a type 5, type 7, when it can predict where they're going to struggle, what they're going to think about, how they relate to the world out there, where conflict is likely going to emerge in their lives. This is going to be confirmation of a theory, at a different kind of level. And when talking about theories and what counts as evidence, what counts as what can be proven, these things matter. They don't all have the same strength. Your personal experience as evidence is generally considered weak. Predictive power, I can predict that types 5s generally have these struggles. I can predict that type 3s generally have these struggles. That's much stronger evidence. But all of them put together are really valuable. Your personal experience of Enneagram really matters. My personal experience of Enneagram really matters. It's even required at some levels. Like, why don't I feel this if it's true would be a real challenge, I think, to Enneagram. And some people have that experience and it needs to be wrestled with. So it seems to me, if the Enneagram, for example, consistently organizes all of our subjective experiences and it receives intersubjective confirmation, like people who type themselves as ones like I do, we experience something real similar. That's a kind of, it's intersubjective confirmation. And if it even goes so far as beyond that, like you're typed as a 1, and because of your type, one might be able to anticipate the psychological patterns that you're going to struggle with, that you're going to wrestle with, that are going to, inform how you see the world next week, 5 years from now. Then the Enneagram is moving into that place where it has explanatory power. All of these things I think are really important in terms of what are we actually looking for in terms of scientific confirmation. That's what I would want to see. I would want to see people collecting data that points in those directions. So coming to the end of that quote, in terms of he's again talking about how useful this is, we await controlled research projects. The practical utility of this new personality can be attained in our lives while we wait. Many of the tools we use in our personal and practical lives have been widely used long before their mechanisms were understood. So I imagine most people who get on a boat could not outline, the physical theories of buoyancy. And certainly there were boats prior to Archimedes, right? Archimedes discovers how buoyancy works. This is like in the 3rd century, I want to say. By the way, if you're looking for baby names, Archimedes. How has Archimedes not been taken up? Archimedes is a great name. At least name your cat Archimedes. It'll make you sound like you're a book nerd. You're at the reading room here in your spare time. I love the name Archimedes. Sword in the Stone. Gotta go back to the Disney films. There's like an owl named Archimedes. It's a good name. Anyway, you may not understand the science behind like anesthetics. they can still be useful. You can still use them to go under for surgery. So just want to be real cautious here when talking about the Enneagram and science and what's required for one to not only use it personally, but as Dr. Daniel Siegel and his team of researchers, again, he's a PhD from Harvard, UCLA professor of psychotherapy. They suggest the Enneagram can be useful and used with joy in practice. And that seems important to me. Side note here, because I imagine some of you are very thoughtful and can get your skeptic brain on. So, Enneagram can be useful. Certainly it can be damaging, though, don't you think? Don't you know people who have been damaged by this? They've been typed or mistyped and it's blown up their relationships, and their marriage clearly fell apart and they had to file for divorce based on the Enneagram. The Enneagram did all of this to them. And that may have happened. I'm saying that offhandedly. Some people may have that story. Here's the thing about ideas that are powerful. Of course, the Enneagram might be able to do damage. You can use psychoanalysis, which has a robust history of scientific confirmation. You can use psychoanalysis to do damage. You can use nuclear energy to do a lot of damage. Scientifically validated and confirmed. I think there's an assumption that by scientists that, look, we are describing the world as it is and showing how, it predictably works. And we're putting this out into the community and journals and the rest because we think human beings have humanity and, wish for others good. And that kind of underlies the scientific process that knowledge is going to lead to better and better things. That may be naive, but certainly it seems to me Enneagram can be used for bad ends, but that shows not that it's false, it actually shows that it's true. If you can use a tool effectively to do great good or great damage, that means there's something there. So even the assumption underneath the critique points to the fact that Enneagram has power. And if it has power, it means it probably has, something there that's real. So, quote 13. I agreed. So he's going to so the first half is all theory. Now we jump into his biography. He's going to tell a little bit about his story. I'm not going to hit a lot of this, but there's some of the stuff that I thought was real interesting. So this is page 25. I agreed that as an attachment researcher, I was focused on the relational aspects of parent-child pairs, and I knew that research revealed how temperament did not predict future outcomes with much statistical power. Yes, they agree, but they were both interested in a system of personality that might offer some new insights from the inside out, looking inward at personality rather than merely as its outward manifestations. This is another confession, and I just want to bring it up that, how should we look at human beings scientifically? It seems like one trend suggests, reversing the order. A lot of folks, when coming to a human being scientifically, are going to first and foremost look at their behavior. What is the behavior this person is exhibiting? Can I categorize this behavior? Can I watch human beings doing the same thing over and over and over again? At what frequencies? And all of it's behavior focused. Motive and why you're doing the behavior is invisible. What Siegel discovered in his talking to folks about Enneagram is that perhaps this should be reversed. You need to analyze behavior last, and you need to look at motivation first. The outward manifestations can be assessed, real easily through scientific observation, and probably that's why science is more drawn to behavior. But they don't tell the whole story, and we know this. Motivation matters. So there's a question in modern philosophy, and this is a huge thing in modern thought. It comes out of the work of Immanuel Kant. Kant says that the starting point of all knowledge moves toward human perception itself. If you want to know what knowledge is, you need to examine human perception. And Kant argues that the mind does not merely receive the world passively. Kant argues that it structures the way the world around us appears. Like as perception is coming at us, our mind is like grabbing it and putting it into categories. It's like you can imagine an ice cube tray and you pour water into it. Like the water is loose and disjoint, but once it goes into the tray, it gets categorized in each of the little slots. Kant wants to argue that's what our mind does. It takes everything we experience and it layers it, puts it into categories. That's in essence what is taking place with your Enneagram type. Like it is taking all of the things that we experience through our emotions, through our somatic experiences, through our minds, and it is systematizing them in a way. And given our type, the mind is putting forth a preference towards, the mental side, or the feelings are given preference given our type, or our somatic experience is given preference, right? Body types 8, 9s, 1. They want to say that their intuitive experience matters more. The world is coming at them. It's getting categorized, yet our intuitive experiences have more value and should start first. 5, 6s, and 7s, not going to go down that path, right? 5, 6s, and 7s who are head types are going to elevate the cognitive and what it might get us in the future first. And then heart types are going to elevate, as of first importance, the emotional center and what it has deduced. This seems to me really important when it comes to what is the Enneagram actually giving language for. Well, it's giving language to how we engage experience. This is something that was a discovery for Siegel, that I need to move away from just focusing on behavior to focusing on what's causing their biases and how that's producing motivation. What's really interesting, side note, is Enneagram doesn't just stop there. The Enneagram is just such a robust theory, right? Big 5 is easy to prove because its scope is so narrow. Enneagram is saying this is how you receive the world, and it doesn't stop there. It says this is how you process the world, this is how you interpret the world, and this is the stance by which you engage the world and then assess. That is a huge system. But underlying that is what, Siegel says here, is that behavior doesn't matter first. Behavior is actually the last domino that we should assess. What we need to do is turn toward the inner life. That needs to be looked at, and that's very difficult, to do scientifically, but that's the project here. And I find that incredibly helpful, wise, and good. So, 14. What intrigued me about Enneagram system was something about its postulating that there was something you might do to gain inner wisdom about how to move from lower states of functioning to more adaptive higher states. Now, once he got into Enneagram, he was like, not only does this describe why someone would struggle with lower functioning, those prisons of the personality, the way the personality is throwing up obstacles, it also shows us how we might adapt, how we might use this insight into gaining quote unquote higher states, what we talked about before. I gave a big long list of here's where it's useful. But his discovery of that, I think, again, really important because this is a specialist in this field. Quote 15. This is longer. And this is, biographical, but I thought it important. So he goes to a workshop. At this workshop, this is when he was first introduced to the Enneagram. At the workshop, I was given the opportunity to interview whole groups of individuals of a given Enneagram type. That system involves 9 distinct types or pathways, each with a number, designation, and a name, each an equally valid way of experiencing life in the world. Simply different from one another. One type is not better or worse than another. Each type is simply distinct in ways that seem to endure over time. For example, a dining table full of those in the 8 category, the protector, shared with me that their journey to being an enlightened 8 involved coming to address 2 important features in their lives. One was that each of them at the table said they could not stand to be vulnerable or acknowledge their dependence on others. The second common experience was that they were challenged in the skills of empathy and insight, two components of a process I had named in earlier writings in my book, Mindsight. These were very caring people, it seemed, but caring about others was different from understanding others or themselves. What this revealed, now he's coming to this fresh. He hasn't even done Enneagram work yet, but he's surrounded by eights and having epiphanies. What this revealed is that while those of a type might share a common ground, there was a developmental pathway of self-understanding and personal growth that could be facilitated by addressing the particular challenges of an unactualized stance. With intention and knowledge, that challenge could be addressed, and then a shift in how a person could live their life could be cultivated. That made sense to me as an outsider to the Enneagram world, was fascinating to me as a scientist, imagining what the mechanisms might be of the type's patterns, and was useful to me as a psychotherapist, always seeking new ways to offer helpful skills to those with whom I worked. And as a person, a parent, and a partner, knowing about these types and their features was profoundly illuminating. You might have noticed how he used an emotional, mental, and physical set of understanding there. It was like the Enneagram was buzzing on all of these fronts. But again, given his biography and his specialization, the fact that he has this reaction to Enneagram theory, to panels of eights coming together and talking together, and him just saying, there's got to be a mechanism here. Really helpful. Like a lot of us experienced that. A lot of us, when we came to Enneagram, we experienced that, right? But we're not informed neuroscientists, but this guy is. That matters. Some of you might be informed neuroscientists. I should apologize. Who knows who listens to my silly ramblings about books that I'm reading for the first time. 16. This is the structure of the book. He ends the intro with saying, all right, here's where we're going. So first three chapters that he's going to do, they're going to cover big idea number 1, the notion that understanding and working with personality can indeed be clinically useful using the PDP framework, that is these 9 types, since the system goes beyond the surface traits to reveal what is inside and underneath the external manifestations of personality. So these first 3 chapters are going to focus on usefulness of all this material. Sounds good to me. Big idea 2, our developmental hypothesis of how the patterns might emerge from infancy and develop across the lifespan to become adaptive strategies that make up personality. Now that is contentious in the Enneagram world. I just want to name it, but he's going to do some business with it. Like, what does it look like for the human brain and personality to come into being over time? When is that taking place? Going to bring up a bunch of buzzwords like nature and nurture. And again, he is a specialist, and so he's going to be engaging those topics and showcasing how the human brain physically comes into being and how the personality forms during that time. Adaptive strategy that make up personality is a big buzzword for me. That is, your personality is in some ways that part of, it's responsible for, we have issues, we have problems. How do we confront them? We have adaptive strategies. Those come out of our type, right? Our type is going to show us how we encounter the world and how we pivot to the world and all of its issues. Adaptive matters here. Lastly, quote 18, in chapter at the end, big idea 3, we're going to cover the importance of wholeness as a driving force beneath personality patterns and how the PDP framework, this discussion of 9 types, can be used to help clients integrate, restore, and experience the benefits of growth through the process of psychotherapy. Integrate, restore, experience the benefits of growth. Again, those are value terms. He is saying that we think that's the end, that's the target, that's the function of psychotherapy. Again, that's not a scientific category. Aiming at these ends. So as a value judgment, that's the realm of philosophy, by the way. Integrate, restore, experience the benefits of growth. I think those are valuable. You may think those are valuable. He's putting out his presuppositions that this is what it's all about. Last quote. Utilizing the PDP model, using the Enneagram, can help clients promote inner development, enhance their interpersonal relationships, and adopt a freer, more flexible, and fulfilling way of life. Again, useful. He thinks the Enneagram achieves these ends. That's a big claim. We also hope that loosening the sometimes tight grip of personality can help individuals realize our deep connections with one another and our human family and our fundamental belongings to all of nature. That's great. I mean, Enneagram's going to help you with your pets and with your house plants. Yeah. Yes, our work as therapists is to support the well-being of individuals and families. And yes, when that therapeutic journey supports people thriving, it can invite an expanded sense of self, a more integrated identity, and a broader belonging that can support the health of our wider, waiting world. Enneagram's going to change the world. Buy the book. That's where he lands. Those are big claims from a scientist. That's scientists in my experience come to their conclusions with a lot of humility most of the time. In terms of this is what can be proven. The fact that he's going that far is no joke. Like that's him sticking his chest out there and saying, you know what, I have found, I have experienced something here that's really worth talking about. And so maybe it's worth talking about. Hey, guess what? On March 24th, we're going to be talking about it. So I would love to invite you again. Go to aroundthecircle.org, sign up for a membership, find the links to our conversations. I want to talk about this book with people who want to talk shop about the biggest ideas in the Enneagram. I want to do this starting this week, and I want to do this for the foreseeable future. It's going to be a big part of our membership. Sometimes when you go to a gym, you go to a club, you are with a training instructor and says, this is how you run, this is how you lift the weights, this is how you do the stretches. That's in essence what my job is going to be. It's just, I'm just a instructor and saying, here's how we're going to do this. But you're the one that are going to lift the weights, run the mile, do the stretches. This is not going to be me just talking. We're going to do this all together, and we're going to ask hard questions, look for big answers, and really, again, engage some of the best thinking on Enneagram that's ever been there, which, according to Dr. Siegel, is how we change the world, our human relationships, and our, connection with houseplants and trees and all the things. I love they went that non-personal way. Anyway, that's what we're up to. I hope that this that hits you where you're at. I would love for you, if you are on Patreon, give me a comment. Tell me what you saw here. Tell me how these can be improved. One that I need that sort of thing. Tell me what you're looking for as I go through these books, what worked, what didn't work, and I'm really looking forward. I already know that 5 or 6 of you have signed up, so I'm looking forward to talking shop with you in the days to come. And that's it. I'm Jeff Cook. May all good things be yours.